Hot topic, huh? So last time, I remember it's been so long ago, a whole week. we talked more about in depth in terms of dispute resolution and working things out. I want to go back to something a little more practical and hands-on in terms of dating, and Jewish dating and religious dating. How do you get to marriage? I think we mentioned, as Rabbi Akiva said, that there's a maxim that you're not allowed to marry a woman unless you see her first. You have to have at least one date. It's very extreme, I know. And we spoke about why. We spoke about that. He says, "V'ahavta l'recha kamocha," because you must love your wife, and if you don't see her, then there's a chance that you'll be disgusted by the way she looks, and that love, which is part of the goals of marriage, won't ever come to fruition. That's a big problem.
But that's infatuation, not love.
Oh, it's true. It's not everything. But sometimes there is a little bit of a click, an attraction. Some level of physical attraction is important. I think this is what it teaches us. And you can't ignore that. The importance of looks is clear in the Bible. Many times our four mothers, actually we're four of them. We usually say four fathers, but there's actually four mothers. About each of them, the Torah says that they were very pretty, and Esther, the big heroine. Next week we have Megillat Esther. She was actually in a beauty contest and won. But we're not so happy about that. But in the end, God had his plan, and it worked out for the best. In any case, dating is essential. Because, as I was saying, Rabbi Akiva says, you have to make sure that the potential for love, even though, of course, one glance is not going to create a relationship, you have the rest of your lives for that. But there has to be at least the potential, some element, some spark. And as I was speaking with somebody else last week, about, we had a debate. He said, do you think, this fellow was asking, do you think you could marry, any man could marry any woman? And I think that he was tending to that direction and saying that, because if you're flexible, you can get it, assuming that you're not, a psychopathic murderer, something like that, assuming you're a normal person, can any man get along with, if you want to get along, if you can compromise, and you can get along. So it's just a question of finding someone. Yes, Moshe.
Well, there's some traits that are not within our control, and I can list an example. Because type 1 diabetes runs in my family, I would never marry someone with type 1 diabetes, because that would, or who would run in their family as well, because that would mean that the chances of our children having it would be incredibly high.
Sure.
So no matter how wonderful she is, if she's type 1 diabetic, or one of her parents, or a number of her siblings are, it's that's a no, an instant no. So
fine, good consideration for sure. There's other considerations, but barring any of those, I'll put that in the category with the axe murderer. That's something we want to stay away from for sure. Any genetic problems and so forth. But assuming normal people, normal standard, medical conditions. This what he was saying. I disagreed. I don't think that's true. Yes.
So regarding dating, you say to have a date is important, and for me also, I find it's very, very important.
Yes.
Reason one, because I used to have a girlfriend before, and what out of those past years that when I have a girlfriend, what I realize is in most cases, when it comes to dating, I'm not talking about marriage. Marriage is something different. When it comes to dating, most of the time we groom ourselves to the best, or we present ourselves the best, not as what we are actually. I might be, just playing around with my pajamas in my home, but when it comes to dating, I groom myself to the best so that I can present myself. So at times what happens, when it comes to dating, we tend to keep aside a few of those flaws and only present the best one. And But when it comes to marriage, all those flaws comes out, and
Sure.
that becomes a big problem to what we call is perseverance or patience between us.
Right.
So as per halakha, as per Judaism, we say date is important, and in order to understand, to come to understanding that we have certain flaws, that we need to understand one another, what is the way or what is the right way to approach one another, or how to communicate it out.
Right. Good point. 100%. Sort of dovetails with what we spoke about last week. I think I quoted that you never really know somebody until you fight with them. There's many different sides to people, and part of the process is designed to get to know the person. Not really a question of black or white, their flaws and their good parts, but it's a question of knowing that all aspects of the personality. By all means, there's much more than just this was an extreme example that I brought from the Talmud at least once that you should see them, but that's a good point. 100%. There's always going to be surprises, and I think that's a good sign. Marriage is a deeper level of the relationship. It's a much different in so many ways, and both emotionally, psychologically, and of course religiously and spiritually. So that for sure you're going to find out new things and newer levels about your spouse once you get married. That's to be expected. So expect the unexpected. But there's a limit to that. Obviously, you want to do your due diligence, as it's called in the business world, and you want to rule out the most extreme things that or just to be even without ruling out, just be aware what you're walking into. You should know that I see this person has a little bit of a temper. This person has a little bit of a tendency to be late, a tendency to be very careful about cleanliness, or more different than I am, whatever it is. You get to know the person a little bit so that you're not walking in blind. And of course, there's still going to be surprises. There's always surprises. But you want to make sure that as best as possible, within the realms of normal, you have a good inkling of who the person is, what their core values are. And we're going to talk about more. We're going to talk about more what you're looking for, to what are you trying to accomplish when you're dating, because obviously, as we're saying, you're not ever going to be able to reach the depths of your relationship that you are when you're married. So what's the point? Why date at all? So this goes back to what I started with, this discussion I had with my friend, and I was saying that the Talmud tells a story of Heleni Hamalka, if I'm not mistaken. And she was a queen. She had many servants. And she was studying with the rabbis, I believe, and they told her that, what does God do all day? Interesting question. What would you do all day if you could just snap your fingers and anything you needed done would happen? And God doesn't even need to snap his fingers. Well, so what's he busy with? Since obviously 6 days, he was pretty busy creating the world. And the seventh day he was resting. Okay.
But it's still the seventh day for Hashem, is it not?
I don't know. We're sort of tongue-in-cheek, all of this discussion, really, because the whole concept of time is different for God. But what is God busy with? So sages gave an answer to this question. And they said what God's busy with is making shidduchim. Creating matches, making matches between man and wife, man and woman, husband and wife. And Heleni Hamalka heard this and said, I don't understand these rabbis. What's so hard? And what she did is she called together all of her help. She had a whole court. She had a palace. She had, I'd say, 50 men and 50 women that were working there as maids, as workmen, whatever it is. And all the single ones. She called them in and she said, okay, I'm putting you together with you, you together with you, you together with you. And she made 50 matches. It's easy peasy. Easy as pie. Easy peasy. The next morning, she comes up, and everybody shows up to work. This one's got a black eye. The other one's limping. The other one's really in a daze. And she said, what happened? Obviously, what happened is it's not so simple just to put together every man with every woman. You have to find the right match. There has to be some kind of compatibility. It's not just that any man can get together with any woman. that's just on a practical level. But really, what I was telling my friend is that there are issues where you're not even supposed to be flexible. Like Moshe mentioned an extreme biological example, a medical question, but you know, if you can get along with this woman, okay, she doesn't want to keep Shabbat, you do. All right, is that the right approach?
No.
Yeah. The point of having a marriage, the point of having a relationship, is to further your common goals. You have to have some things, and so you're dating someone, and you see that they don't. They're not nice to. They butt in line, or they're not nice to the people they meet on the street, or you don't leave a tip, because why should I leave them a tip? Whatever. There's certain things that you notice about them, and you say, this is not what I want. I want to be someone. I want to have someone who's kind, who's merciful, who is aware of their surroundings. So there's so many things that you can find out in a date, and that you shouldn't be flexible about. Just say, okay, this is the woman, no matter what. Could be she doesn't have good character, and some people are such specific things that bother you. There are many things to discover during the dating process, and that's why it is important to date.
So it should be almost half a year dating.
Oh, very good. I was expecting someone to say something like that. And what does that qualify? If you remember last week's lesson, that qualifies as a position. Right? It's a position, very well defined. It says 6 months, not a day more, not a day less. And I can give you another position. You have to have no more than 3 dates. And you have to make it, those are positions. Those are extreme positions on both sides. I mean, there's more extreme positions that nowadays people have. You know what's the most common position in the Western world today? Don't get married before you've lived together. That's also a position.
Before you meet your mother-in-law.
That might be a smart position, but yes, Moshe.
So I remember reading online in an article. I don't know how authoritative this is. But
Okay.
When it comes to social interaction,
Probably as authoritative as most online articles.
Okay. When it comes to social interactions, you can change yourself for 90 days, but with a person. But after 90 days, you start to involuntarily just act the way that you actually.
You go back to your normal, yeah. Uh-huh.
So
you can act for only so long, right? So it seems like.
According to this article, it needs to be at least 90 days.
I hear, right? According to that article, right? I understand that for sure. It's very hard to put your finger on a specific amount of time, but if they have some science to back that up, that'd be amazing. That's fascinating. Yes, please.
So about what you say about at least 90 days.
I didn't say anything like that. Someone mentioned that. I didn't. Don't confuse what I.
But is there a maximum like some people maybe dating 2 years?
Sure. I'd be happy to speak about that. So what I believe is, based on the principles that I've been teaching you last week, and we'll continue to talk about them now, I'm against, in general, positions. I think there's so many variables and so many conditions where it's almost silly to set a certain standard where you have to have one rule of law, which is one shoe that fits everybody. There's so many different situations. Sometimes you have people that grew up together in the same community, in the same school, in the same social structure. They went through similar life experiences. They speak the same language, and then they meet each other, and there's a spark, and they're interested, and they have a few dates where they really talk about what they want to accomplish, and they see they're on the same page. They see there's an attraction. Good to go. There's no reason to wait for 90 days or 100 days or 1,000 days. If there's not too many gaps to bridge. Sometimes you have somebody that grows up in communist Russia and someone that grew up in Jamaica. And they each come from different social standards, and customs are different, and they don't even speak the same language. There's a language barrier, there's a cultural barrier, then there's a religious barrier. One person went to a yeshiva, which where everybody wears black and white and they expect the men to learn all day and never to help lift a finger in the home. And then there's another, the other one went to a seminary or a yeshiva where they're very modern and very Western, and they expect everything's going to be equal, and they're both going to be changing diapers equally and managing the house, and maybe she's intending to be a lawyer or a doctor and he doesn't have a job, and so she's going to be out of the house. He's going to be the house husband. There's so many variables, there's so many ways of making a relationship work. And if you're not coming from the same assumptions, from the same cultural background, I think, again, I'm not going to put any position. I'm not going to say it has to be 6 months. I'm not going to say it has to be 2 years. I'm not going to put any number on it, but it makes sense that you're going to need a lot more time to make the relationship work. And if you feel this is a good person with the same values as me, and then there's an attraction, and there's something special about them, you want to pursue a relationship with them, by all means, go for it. But it's going to take longer. I think you should take longer to make sure that you're able to overcome whatever gaps there are, whatever differences there are. So I'm against putting positions on it. And I know some rabbis say, there's a rabbi used to teach here, he would say to all the students, says, don't even introduce me to your friend who you're going out with, a girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever it is, or definitely not a fiancé, before you've had 15 dates. This was his minimum. 15. Some people say it's a lot, some people say it's a little. I just don't say anything. I say it depends on the situation, depends on the couple, depends on the background. I would say, like, what did I say last week? The Rabbi Furman says, don't come to me until you've fought. Right? Until your relationship has reached a certain level of depth, where you get to know the person, like Asher was saying, perhaps different sides of them, different, a little bit deeper than just, she looks nice and she's religious, she says she wants to be religious and have 6 kids, and I say, I want to have 6 kids, well, it's perfect. There's nothing more to investigate. No, right? That would be wrong. So you understand what I'm saying is that we're looking at the need. The need is to try to get a little bit of a beginning of a relationship, a beginning of an understanding of who the person is, a little bit of a deeper understanding of who yourself is and who the other one is, and then you can start talking about plans, start talking about common goals, and talk about how it would work. Practically, there's so many elements to it that you have to. But those are the needs of dating, without getting into a position of how many. And what is a date? If you say it has to be 15 dates? Does it qualify a 10-minute coffee shop? Does that qualify, or does it have to be an hour and a half, an hour and 36 minutes for it to qualify as one of those number of 15 dates? What qualifies as a date?
You have to have a desire to food.
That's it. Do you have to? How much have you spent? Have you spent? That's it. Exactly. So it gets silly. There's no need to.
You have to wait a few moments before you take 3 steps forward at the end. It has to be at least that period of time.
Right. So it's. But on the other hand, we're people. We need guidance, and so I'm trying to give you guidance without giving you a specific position. If you must date X number of dates, or you must. What I'm trying to tell you is that you need to reach. Try to define what are these needs. What do we need to do when you're dating, in order to move ahead to the next stage and contemplate marriage, okay? I mean, you should be contemplating marriage at the very beginning, before you date. I don't think you should be dating before you're contemplating marriage. In Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, we believe in separation of the sexes as much as possible. If it's not for the sake of marriage, it could lead to, as what did we say? Could lead to mixed dancing, right? We don't want flirtation. We don't want just frivolity. We don't want mixing of the sexes. That's right. We're supposed we prefer. It's a mitzvah to be modest and to be. It's a big mitzvah to be very close with your wife, but not with any other women. And until you're married, you don't have that mitzvah of closeness. So developing a close relationship with somebody who's not your wife is problematic. Of course, we're entering the problematic issue of dating, because you do need to get to some level of understanding, of deeper understanding with a woman who's not your wife yet, because you're not yet married, and so you're walking a fine line. So it's a tricky business. But so you have to be contemplating marriage to even start to go out dating. Otherwise, you could meet a woman at work. You have coworkers, or you're in school. I had acquaintances that were women in school with me, and in college. This goes back 30 years, but this is just part of, we live in a mixed society, and so you're going to have some level of relationship with women. Of course, you have a sister, or you have a sister-in-law, so there's going to be levels of relationships with women. It's not like you're not allowed to ever speak to a man, or you're not allowed to ever speak to a woman. There's some communities where that's the directive. It's just never talk to a woman, never look at a woman, because unless she's your wife. And it's hard to walk down the street if you're not supposed to look at a woman. But you can try. I think that most of us, I'm speaking to the crowd at hand, we grew up in a mixed society. It's normal for us to have interactions with women. You go to the supermarket, you have a waiter at a restaurant, the waitress at a restaurant. Things, you have work. Most workplaces are mixed. So there is a certain level of normal, a mixing of the sexes, which is considered to be standard. You have to be careful always that it doesn't become anything that's intimate, or anything that's not appropriate. It's casual friendships. To go out on dates with people if you're just because you want to have a good time, that's inappropriate. You really go to the level of dating where you want to spend time together with someone of the opposite sex. That should be in the context of, I'm looking for a spouse. I'm looking for someone that I potentially could start a family with and live with for the rest of my life. Other than that, you want to go out and hang out and have a good time. You can hang out with a guy friend, not with a girlfriend. Having girlfriends when it's not in the context of dating for marriage is inappropriate, I believe. And goes beyond the issues where actual halachot, which you might be violating, you have to be careful not to violate. And in terms of, specifics like not touching each other, we mentioned extent, not looking at women when they're not dressed, or not, when they're doing physical activity, things which might arouse you. And there's a mitzvah called yichud, prohibition of seclusion. You're not allowed to be secluded with a woman when there's nobody else there, nobody else can see, because you might lead you to be intimate. And it's asur. It's asur. There's rules of these laws. And so you have to learn that to make sure that even though you're dating and you are creating a relationship and you are spending time alone, it can't absolutely be alone because the prohibition of yichud. So we have to learn those laws. So there's laws to learn. But other than the laws, we have to understand what the ultimate goal is. The need is to check if you can develop a relationship which can turn into the highest level of love of a human being other than yourself, and that's you with your spouse. Yes, Moshe.
How does yichud work in a car? Do you just not be in the car together, windows down?
Most car windows are not tinted. You can see into a car.
Okay, so as long as you can see in.
But at night it's a problem. Some rabbis say that you can't drive a single man and a single woman, or one of them is single, and it's not your wife. You're not allowed to drive at night in a car together with a woman that you can't have yichud with, which means anybody other than your wife. It's a problem. Unless, then there's rules. If there's two people of the opposite sex, what are the rules of what counts as seclusion? We have to study that at some point. Not this minute, okay? We're not going to go into all the details of the laws of yichud. But you're right, that a car can be a problematic situation, especially since we all know that, someone's driving the car can, all of a sudden turn off into a side street, and unfortunately, there's abuse and there's attacks. Cars can be a very dangerous thing, taking a lift with somebody that you don't know, or even somebody that you do know. The halacha forbids seclusion between somebody who's, with somebody who's not your spouse. Another question, David.
Seating. I know, let's say you're not supposed to sit next to somebody of the opposite sex, but let's say on the rakevet when there's 4 seats.
So what you
What
know...
if you sit down and somebody sits up and down next to you? Are you obligated to get up?
I've done that.
And then ultimately, the third part of that question is like I have a neighbor who's an older woman. She's old enough to be my mother, and she said she wanted me to sit on the bench next to her. And I said I wasn't sure I was okay. She said, "Come on, she's old enough. That's not an issue." Where do we hold on that?
So as usual with your questions and many of your questions, it starts off from what you think is the given and what you think you know. And if that's wrong, then all the other questions coming after that will be based on wrong. There's no prohibition of sitting next to a woman who's not your wife. As long as you're not touching her, and as long as the context is not romantic. You're allowed to sit next to a woman on a bus. You heard it here first. Is it a good idea? That's another question. But it's not prohibited.
Rob, what if, like, sitting next to them, there's physical contact? So, like, on the Rakam, no, the seats are a little
So that's
skinny,
not
your
allowed.
thighs are tiny.
So that's not allowed. That's not allowed. The physical contact with clothing is not allowed. Don't. Physical contact is prohibited. But if you have a park bench, you can sit next to a woman, even if you're not dating her. So there's no proximity censor. Like within 4 amot, I'm not allowed to be of a woman. Beep 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 beep. There's the opposite sex near me. There's no such halacha. There's no such halacha that you're not allowed to be in proximity to another woman. Of course, the context means everything. If you're sitting close to her in a dimly lit restaurant with candlelight, then that might be a problem. But it's not prohibited to sit next to someone on a bus. On a bus, it depends on the situation, how close the seats are, if there's going to be touching. The bus sometimes moves and there is touching, and so it's not advisable. It's not advisable to be sitting next to a woman, but don't confuse that with prohibition, because it's very important, because sometimes people do think, oh, I'm not going to sit next to a woman, and a woman comes, sits down next to them, totally oblivious to anything to do with Orthodox law and custom, and she thinks she's doing the most normal thing in the world. She sits down next to you, and you like freeze and make a face and look all uncomfortable, and you get up and run the other way, and she's offended.
Good.
No, it's not good at all. You're not allowed to offend other people because of your religious beliefs. She didn't do anything wrong. She sat down on the bus. We don't have segregation here on the buses. This is not Jewish law. You don't have to have segregated buses. Again, because it could be a good idea in certain circumstances, but there's no law, and there is a law not to offend somebody. So you know what the story is, that our greatest rabbis were very, very humble in their lifestyles, and the story is told of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who would ride the bus to and from his house every day to the yeshiva where he taught, the greatest posek of the generation, and there's books written about him and about his halacha, but about his behaviors as well. The story is told that he sat on the bus like he did every day, and a woman came down, sat next to him. You think he jumped up and started to, brush himself off? He very calmly, in Israel, there's a ring, a button you push to stop off. So he pushed the button, and he got off the bus. And the student was with him, says, he followed him, says, Rabbi, we're not at where we're trying to get to. We haven't reached our destination yet. Why did you get off the bus? He said, well, I didn't want to offend her by moving, that she would feel like she was unapproved of or anything like that. And so I'll cut off, and I'll get on the next bus. And he got on the next bus that came, and he waited 5 minutes. He got on the next bus. Amazing story. How sensitive you have to be not to offend anybody. So, by all means, there's no prohibition of sitting next to it. It's not prohibited, also. And in some cases, when you're on a crowded bus, by all means, you should consider taking the next bus and not being cramped and where you have to be inappropriately rubbing against the people of the opposite sex. But if the next bus is also going to be cramped, and the next bus is also going to be cramped, next bus is also going to be cramped, the rabbis have said that there is room to be lenient in terms of sitting next to, as long as you do your utmost best to not intentionally be touching each other. Sometimes you're sitting next to a woman, as I said. Sometimes at work you're sitting next to a woman, and sometimes at in school there are circumstances where you have to be in close proximity to the woman. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. As I said, as long as there's no yichud and there's no touching and there's no intimacy that's engendered by the situation, there's no prohibition involved in sitting down next to a woman. Okay, so what you know was you started off your question with, I know you're not allowed to sit next to a woman, and now the question is X, Y, Z. The whole presumption was wrong. The whole presumption is there's no, right, the actual prohibitions are, intimacy, physical contact, or yichud. That's what all that comes to mind. Other than that, so getting back to our topic at hand, dating, right? There's so much to talk about that we haven't really even started, but it's part of. We started talking a little bit about, the positions that people take, like how many times to date. And we prefer to speak about the goals and the needs behind dating, starting off with. Making sure that you have common values and common goals, and making sure that there's some level of attraction interpersonal. The second question we have to discuss, someone said to me, I recently made a shidduch. That didn't work, but yet, maybe it will. And I was so excited because the two people didn't ask for a picture. So rare nowadays. Nowadays, of course, you want to hear about someone that you want to set you up, but you want a picture. And right. So now you can always check if not everybody is Facebook though. So and they didn't, and I thought that was good. And the question is, why is that good? Should at least, there has to be some attraction. We were saying, like Rabbi Kiva, you have to meet first. So why not a picture? The answer is that pictures are many times misleading. And the looks are part of an entire structure of who the person is. Sometimes, they look one way, but when you see how they conduct themselves and how they act and how they dress, it impacts on how attractive they are. It's not just a question of, absolute beauty. You're not looking for the perfect model, which has to have the proportions all, they actually measure models to make sure that all the proportions between the different sides of parts of their face are in the right position. And that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for, the attraction comes when you see an entire personality. It's not only looks. Looks are important. That's why people do ask for pictures, and if they do ask, I do give them, and you try to get the best picture you can. But really, it's just a very small piece of the puzzle. Much more important to find that you have the common goals and the common values and everything else that we're going to talk about. Even before sometimes it's even before the first date. You're not going to go out on a date. Oh, she's a girl, I'm a guy. She looks nice, let's go on a date. No. There's what did Moshe say? Moshe said, of course you have to check out if there's a genetic problem in the family. And maybe it's more specific. If you have a specific problem, and there's all sorts of, science behind that. But even beyond that, why waste your time with somebody who doesn't keep Shabbat? If you says, I'm not going to go, why waste your time with somebody who says, I want to send my kids to secular schooling because it's more important to me than Torah values. Why waste your time on that? Clearly, that one of the principal parts of having a family is to educate your children in Torah values. So there are things that you can ask, and you should find out about before you agree to go out on a date. And looks can be part of that, but as I said, it really many times turns into a stumbling block instead of an aid, because the person has a bad picture, they're not photogenic, but actually they're prettier in real life than they are in the picture, and so forth. There's so many things. I wouldn't make that's not a necessary criterion, but finding out about their background, about their, where they're coming from, what they're looking for, what what their plans are, and what their style. Someone, for example, writes on their shidduch profile, I love nature, I want only to go out with someone who loves nature. And the other person can't stand nature. This is the worst thing in my life whenever I have to be outside of the comfort of the air conditioner. Maybe, I wouldn't say absolutely no, but it might not be the first choice of making that match. Because you try to match up as much as possible, but even those things, those are also positions. And really what's important is the need below, the need underneath, the deeper need of what they're looking for in a relationship and in personality-wise. That's much harder to define, but that's going to get you to much more success in shidduchim. Asher.
Yeah, so when it comes to dating and starting a conversation, it's very important to let yourself, the other person knows something about you. But what is we are talking about Jewish ways of relationships and marriage. So am I supposed to be 80% selfish of this is what I want and I'll accept 30% of you? Or it should be more like, okay, I'll be considerate on what you are, because sometimes we are old, not like the old days. Now we know about if a person comes from certain countries or certain background, we know that, oh, they love these, they kind of like this. So we have certain perceptions in our mind.
Sure.
And sometimes we, let's say in my case, right, if I happen to date someone, let's say, comes from the western side of the world, and I know that, okay, they love these, so am I supposed to be considerate and thinking of what I should understand from her? Or should I say, this is what I want, and I want you to understand it? So what is the limit, and how much should I go, like, this is mine, and this is what I'll understand you?
Right. So my answer is going to be in percentages. It's going to be 30-70, 60-40. Not. I can't give you an answer to that question. You can't put a number on it.
Right. But I need to let her know that this is what I want. But
that's exactly what
it turns out like I'm being selfish. Why don't you understand me instead?
Right. So then it depends on the area. Like I was saying, there are certain things that, of course, you can be flexible about, and you should be flexible about. And there's certain core values and core things that are important to you, which that's part of who you are, and you don't want to be flexible about, and that's fine. But what's the balance between them? That's a big question. It's hard to put your finger on the answer to that. But I think this is a big discussion that you have when you're dating. This is what you're doing when you're dating. You're trying to figure out. Sometimes you don't even know yourself. What's the core things that I care about? I never even realized until you start to talk with somebody else about them, and you realize how important it is to you. And you never thought that it would be that important, but you see that it's bothering you that the person is X, Y, Z. And so sometimes the process of dating helps you clarify what is something that's a core value and what's something that's something you're used to, but you can be flexible about. There's also situations where it's something you're so used to that you don't think you can change. Someone's addicted, unfortunately. You can want to be not addicted all you want, but if you're addicted, you're addicted. It's something you have to deal with. And you can't get married on the assumption that, I'm going to change, or she's going to change, or the opposite. You have to come to terms with a certain level of acceptance of how your understanding as much as possible, even though we're always striving for growth and always developing throughout our lives. You never get married with the expectation that, now she's like this, but I'm going to change her to be something else. That's a recipe for disaster. But we have to stop here, and we'll continue talking about relationships next week.